Jake's stomach lurched as he watched the millionaire secure his injured racehorse to the train tracks, the animal's terrified whinnies piercing the twilight air. With the ground already trembling beneath his feet, the 10-year-old knew he had seconds to decide if he dared stand against the most powerful man in town to save an innocent life. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Frederick Wellington III stood at the edge of his vast estate, his silhouette harsh against the setting sun. The golden rays that painted the countryside did nothing to soften his expression as he glared at the magnificent thoroughbred before him. Thunder, once the pride of his racing stable, now stood with his head hanging low, his left foreleg slightly raised off the ground. "Worthless," Frederick spat, turning to his stable manager, Jenkins. "Absolutely worthless." Jenkins shifted uncomfortably, his weathered hands twisting his cap. "Sir, with proper rest and rehabilitation, Thunder could still..." "Could still what?" Frederick cut him off, his voice as sharp as a blade. "Lose me more money. I've invested millions in this horse. The Derby was supposed to be his moment, our moment." He turned back to Thunder, whose chestnut coat still gleamed despite his injury. And he couldn't even make it past the final turn. The injury had happened 3 days ago, during the race that was supposed to cement Frederick's status among the elite racing community. Thunder had been leading, his powerful stride eating up the track when suddenly he'd faltered. The tendon tear had been severe, not career-ending with proper care, but certainly season-ending. For a man like Frederick Wellington III, that distinction meant nothing. Patience had never been his virtue, and compassion even less so. He had built his fortune in real estate development, tearing down the old to make way for the new, never looking back. He approached his racing stable with the same cold calculation. Assets were either performing or discarded. "Sir," Jenkins tried again, "he's still young, only 4. With time is money, Jenkins. Money I'm not willing to waste on a lame horse." Frederick's gaze wandered to the distant train tracks that cut through the valley beyond his property. The 7:30 freight train would be passing through soon, as it did every evening, right on schedule. A thought, dark and resolute, formed in his mind. "Have the horse ready at the south gate in 1 hour," Frederick ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And bring Davis with you." Jenkins paled. "Sir, surely you don't mean to..." "1 hour, Jenkins. That's an order." As Frederick walked back toward his mansion, the sprawling Georgian revival that dominated the hillside, he didn't look back at Thunder. The horse that had once been his ticket to the winner's circle was now just a liability, a reminder of failure that Frederick refused to tolerate. Inside the lavish home, Frederick poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid matching the sunset that blazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He had never been one for sentimentality. When his investments failed to perform, he cut his losses. It was that simple. Thunder would be no different. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's homes. 45 minutes until he needed to meet Jenkins. Just enough time to finalize the plans for his newest development, a luxury condominium complex that would replace an aging neighborhood in the city. More people displaced, more profits gained. Frederick felt nothing about this. It was simply business. Meanwhile, 10-year-old Jake Miller pedaled his bike along the dirt road that ran parallel to the train tracks. His red and black plaid shirt flapped in the evening breeze as he raced against the setting sun, trying to make it home before dark. His mother would worry otherwise, and Jake had already pushed his luck by staying so late at his friend's house. The shortcut home took him past the southern edge of the Wellington estate. Jake had always been fascinated by the massive property, with its perfect green lawns and thoroughbred horses that looked like they'd stepped out of a storybook. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, He'd climb the fence just to catch a glimpse of the magnificent animals running in the paddocks. Today, though, something was different. As Jake approached the spot where the estate's private road met the main path, he noticed a black SUV parked near the tree line. Curiosity slowed his pedaling. He'd never seen any of the Wellington vehicles parked so close to the boundary before. Letting his bike drop to the ground, Jake crept closer, ducking behind bushes. The evening shadows provided perfect cover as he inched toward the scene unfolding before him. 3 men stood near the SUV. Jake recognized Mr. Wellington immediately. His stern face had been on the cover of business magazines his teacher sometimes brought to class. The other 2 men were handling a horse, a beautiful chestnut with a white blaze down its face. Even from a distance, Jake could tell something was wrong. The horse seemed to be favoring one leg, and its usually proud posture was diminished. "Get him over there, quickly," Mr. Wellington ordered, pointing toward the train tracks that lay just beyond a small clearing. "The freight train comes through in 15 minutes. Jake's heart froze in his chest. Surely he hadn't heard correctly. They couldn't be planning to. No, that was impossible. Even someone as notoriously cold as Frederick Wellington wouldn't do something so cruel. But as Jake watched, the 2 men led the limping horse toward the tracks. One of them, an older man who seemed reluctant, kept looking back at Mr. Wellington as if hoping for a change of heart. The other man moved with mechanical efficiency, carrying what looked like rope in his hands. "Sir, please reconsider," the older man pleaded, his voice carrying on the still evening air. "Thunder deserves better than this. We could sell him or retire him to stud. There are other options." "The decision is made, Jenkins," Wellington replied coldly. "A bullet would be more humane, but this way, the insurance pays out. It'll look like an unfortunate accident, a horse that escaped and wandered onto the tracks." Jake felt sick. The beautiful horse, Thunder, was going to be tied to the tracks and left to die. He had to do something, but what could a 10-year-old boy do against 3 grown men? His hands trembled as he pulled his phone from his pocket. He could call for help, but would anyone arrive in time? In the distance, Jake heard the long, mournful whistle of the approaching freight train. 15 minutes had suddenly become much less. His time to act was now. With courage he didn't know he possessed, Jake emerged from his hiding place. His heart pounded in his ears, almost drowning out the sound of his own voice as he shouted, "Stop! You can't do this!" 3 pairs of eyes turned toward him, expressions ranging from surprise to anger. Frederick Wellington's face darkened with fury at the interruption, while Jenkins looked almost relieved. The 3rd man, Davis, merely seemed annoyed at the complication. "This is private property, boy," Wellington said, his voice dangerously low. "Go home before I call the authorities." Jake stood his ground, though his knees felt like jelly. "If you hurt that horse, I'll be the one calling the authorities," he said, holding up his phone. "And I've been recording everything." It was a bluff. He hadn't been recording at all, but something in his determined stance must have given Wellington pause. The rich man's eyes narrowed as he evaluated this unexpected obstacle in his path. Thunder, sensing the tension, shifted nervously, his eyes rolling to show the whites. The beautiful animal seemed to understand that his fate hung in the balance, dependent on the confrontation between a powerful, ruthless man and a small boy in a plaid shirt whose only weapon was his sense of right and wrong. The silence that followed Jake's bluff seemed to stretch forever. In the distance, the train whistle sounded again, closer this time. Jake could feel the vibrations in the ground beneath his feet, a reminder that time was running out. Frederick Wellington's face twisted into a cold smile. "You're lying," he said, taking a step toward Jake. "No child your age is quick-witted enough to start recording. Hand over the phone." Jake backed away, clutching his phone tighter. "I've already sent the video to my mom," he lied again, his voice cracking slightly. "She knows where I am. If I don't come home soon, she'll call the police. Jenkins, the older stable hand, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Wellington," he said quietly, "perhaps we should reconsider. The boy is trespassing and lying," Wellington snapped, but Jake could see a flicker of doubt in the man's eyes. Wellington was used to controlling every situation, to people bowing to his will. A child standing up to him was an unexpected variable. Thunder whinnied softly, shifting his weight again. The horse's intelligent eyes seemed to move between Jake and his owner, as if understanding the stakes of this confrontation. Davis, the other man, grew impatient. "Sir, we're running out of time. The train—" "I know about the damn train," Wellington hissed. He turned back to Jake, his expression calculating. "Listen, boy, this horse is my property. I paid more for him than your family probably makes in a decade. What happens to him is my business." Jake's fear was giving way to anger now. "That doesn't give you the right to hurt him. He's alive, he feels pain." To his horror, he felt tears welling in his eyes. He blinked them away furiously, not wanting to appear weak in front of this man. Wellington's eyes narrowed. "Life isn't fair, kid. The sooner you learn that, the better. Now get out of here before you get yourself in real trouble." The train whistle blew again, even closer. They had perhaps 5 minutes, maybe less. Jake knew he was running out of options. His bluff hadn't worked as well as he'd hoped. Wellington wasn't backing down, just buying time until Jake left or the train came. Either way, Thunder would end up tied to those tracks. That's when Jake noticed something. While Wellington and Davis were focused on him, Jenkins was slowly loosening his grip on Thunder's lead rope. The old stable hand's eyes met Jake's for just a moment, and Jake understood instantly. Jenkins was giving him a chance. Jake took a deep breath and did the only thing he could think of. He created a diversion. "Look," he shouted suddenly, pointing behind Wellington. "Someone's coming." It was an old trick, childish even, but in the growing darkness and with tensions high, it worked. Wellington and Davis turned reflexively just for a second. In that moment, Jake darted forward, snatched Thunder's lead rope from Jenkins' loosened grip, and pulled. The horse, startled but responsive, followed Jake as he ran toward the shelter of the nearby trees. "Stop him," Wellington roared, but Jake had the advantage of surprise. Thunder, despite his injury, moved willingly with Jake, perhaps sensing that the boy meant safety. Davis lunged after them, but Jenkins, deliberately or not, stumbled into his path, sending both men tumbling to the ground. "Sorry, sir," Jenkins mumbled, his apology clearly insincere as he slowly got to his feet, buying Jake precious seconds. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he led Thunder deeper into the trees that bordered the train tracks. The horse limped behind him, moving awkwardly but determinedly. Jake could hear Wellington and Davis crashing through the underbrush behind them, shouting threats and curses. "It's okay, boy," Jake whispered to Thunder, who was breathing heavily. "We just need to hide until the train passes. Then they'll have to give up their plan." Finding a dense thicket, Jake guided Thunder behind it, then stood perfectly still, one hand on the horse's neck to keep him calm. Thunder seemed to understand the need for quiet, standing motionless despite his obvious discomfort. Wellington and Davis moved past their hiding spot, flashlight beams cutting through the growing darkness. "When I find that kid," Wellington was saying, "he'll wish he'd never set foot on my property." Jake held his breath until they were gone, moving deeper into the woods in their search. Only then did he exhale, his body trembling with adrenaline. "Good boy," he whispered to Thunder, stroking the horse's strong neck. "You're very brave." The ground beneath them vibrated more intensely now, and the beam of the train's headlights swept across the trees as it approached the bend. Jake peeked out from their hiding place and saw the massive freight train thundering past on the tracks where, moments ago, Thunder was to be tied. Wellington's cruel plan had been thwarted, at least for now. But Jake knew they weren't safe yet. Wellington and Davis would keep searching, and Jake couldn't stay hidden in the woods forever with an injured horse. He needed to get Thunder somewhere safe, somewhere Wellington couldn't reach him. But where? As the train's rumble faded into the distance, Jake made a decision. He couldn't take Thunder home. His family's small apartment at the edge of town had no place for a horse. But his Uncle Mark had a small farm about 2 miles away. If he could get Thunder there, Uncle Mark would know what to do. "Come on, boy," Jake whispered, gently tugging the lead rope. "We need to move before they come back." Thunder followed obediently, limping but determined. Jake stayed off the main paths, moving through the trees parallel to the dirt road. The journey would be slower this way, but safer. As they walked, Jake kept one hand on Thunder's neck, speaking softly to him. "You're going to be okay. My uncle knows all about horses. He'll help you get better." In the distance, Jake could hear Wellington and Davis calling to each other, their search expanding. Jenkins was nowhere to be heard. Jake wondered if the old stable hand had quietly returned to the estate, his part in this small rebellion complete. The night grew darker, but a nearly full moon provided enough light for Jake to find his way. His bike lay forgotten back by the tracks. He'd have to come back for it tomorrow. Right now, Thunder was all that mattered. The horse's breathing had grown labored, his injury clearly paining him more with each step. Jake felt a pang of guilt. Was he causing Thunder more suffering by making him walk so far? But the alternative was unthinkable. A few miles of pain was better than death on the train tracks. They had gone perhaps half a mile when Jake heard the sound of an engine on the road nearby. Headlights swept through the trees as a vehicle moved slowly along the dirt path. Jake froze, pulling Thunder deeper into the shadows. The black SUV, Wellington's car, crept along the road, its occupants clearly searching for any sign of Jake and the horse. "We need to be extra quiet now," Jake whispered, his mouth close to Thunder's ear. The horse stood still, seeming to sense the danger. The SUV stopped. Jake's heart nearly stopped with it. Had they been spotted? Then, to his horror, he heard Wellington's voice carrying clearly through the night air. The boy couldn't have gone far with an injured horse. "Davis, take the dogs out of the trunk. Let's see if they can pick up the scent." Dogs. Jake hadn't considered that possibility. His plan to reach Uncle Mark's farm suddenly seemed much more difficult, perhaps impossible. The sound of dogs barking sent a chill down Jake's spine. He'd grown up around dogs, had a golden retriever named Scout at home, but these weren't friendly pets. These were hunters, and he and Thunder were the prey. Jake's mind raced. He remembered something his Uncle Mark had taught him during their hikes in these very woods. Water could mask a scent trail. There was a creek that ran through this stretch of forest, eventually flowing under the train tracks through a large drainage pipe. "This way," Jake whispered, gently urging Thunder forward. The horse hesitated, his injured leg clearly causing him pain. "I know it hurts, boy, but we have to keep moving." Thunder seemed to understand the urgency in Jake's voice. With a soft snort, he followed, each step careful but determined. The barking grew louder. Wellington's dogs had picked up their trail and were closing in fast. Jake could hear men shouting commands, flashlight beams dancing through the trees behind them. Finally, they reached the creek. Its waters weren't deep, just a foot or so in most places, but it was wide enough that Thunder would need to step carefully. "Easy now," Jake coaxed, stepping into the cold water first. The shock of it made him gasp, but he didn't hesitate. "Follow me, Thunder. You can do it." The horse eyed the water warily, then slowly, tentatively placed his hooves into the creek. Jake kept the lead rope loose but secure, giving Thunder the confidence to move forward. Together, they waded downstream, the water washing away their scent. Jake kept to the middle of the creek, where the current was strongest, hoping it would carry away any trace of their passage. Behind them, The dogs had reached the spot where Jake and Thunder had entered the water. Their barking turned frantic and confused as they lost the scent. Jake heard Wellington cursing, ordering the handlers to search both banks. The creek bent sharply to the right, following the natural contour of the land. As they rounded this bend, Jake spotted what he'd been hoping for, the large drainage pipe that ran under the train tracks. During the dry months, the pipe was mostly empty, with just a shallow stream running through its bottom. It was wide enough for a horse, though Thunder would need to lower his head to enter. "In here," Jake whispered, leading the horse toward the dark opening. Thunder balked, pulling back against the lead rope. The horse's eyes were wide with fear. The dark tunnel clearly frightened him. "I know it's scary," Jake said softly, stroking Thunder's neck. "But we need to hide, just for a little while. I promise I won't leave you." The sounds of pursuit grew closer. They had no choice. Jake stepped into the pipe, the shallow water inside soaking his sneakers even more. He tugged gently on the lead rope, looking back at Thunder with all the reassurance he could muster. "Please, boy, trust me." Perhaps it was the gentle tone, or maybe the horse sensed their danger, but Thunder finally lowered his proud head and stepped cautiously into the pipe. The space was tight. The horse's back nearly brushed the top of the concrete tunnel, but they could move forward. Jake led Thunder deeper into the pipe until they were about 20 feet in, far enough that they wouldn't be immediately visible from either end, but not so far that they'd be trapped if someone looked inside. "Good boy," Jake whispered, his hand resting on Thunder's shoulder. He could feel the horse trembling, whether from fear or cold or pain. He couldn't tell. Probably all three. They stood in silence as the sounds of the search party approached. Flashlight beams swept across the creek, and Jake held his breath as one light briefly illuminated the entrance to their hiding place before moving on. They must have left the creek somewhere else. A gruff voice, "Davis," Jake thought, called out. "The dogs can't find the trail." "Keep looking." That was Wellington's voice, tight with fury. "That boy can't have gone far with my horse." Jake felt a surge of anger at the way Wellington said, "my horse," as if Thunder were just property, not a living being with feelings and worth beyond his monetary value. The search continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Eventually, the sounds grew distant as Wellington and his men moved further downstream, their dogs still sniffing futilely along both banks. Jake exhaled slowly. They were safe, at least for now. But they couldn't stay in the drainage pipe forever. Thunder needed proper care for his leg, and Jake's family would be frantic with worry by now. As if on cue, Jake's phone vibrated in his pocket. With trembling fingers, he pulled it out to see his mother's name on the screen. It was nearly 9:30 p.m., over 2 hours past when he should have been home. "Mom?" he whispered, answering the call. "Jacob Miller, where on earth are you?" His mother's voice was tight with worry. "It's dark out, and you know the rules about being home before sunset." "I'm sorry, Mom," Jake said, keeping his voice low. "Something happened. I'm okay, but I need help. Is Uncle Mark there?" There was a pause, then his mother's voice, even more concerned. "Mark? No, but I can call him. Jake, what's going on? Where are you?" Jake hesitated. He didn't want to worry his mother more, but he needed adult help now. "I'm in the woods near the train tracks. I found an injured horse. Someone was going to hurt him, Mom. I had to help." Another pause. Jake could practically hear his mother processing this information, trying to decide how much of it was one of her son's overactive imagination and how much was real trouble. "Jake, stay where you are. I'm calling Mark right now, and then I'm coming to find you. Is it safe where you are?" "Yes," Jake said, glancing at Thunder, who stood patiently in the dim light of the drainage pipe. "We're hidden, but there are men looking for us with dogs. Bad men, Mom. They wanted to tie the horse to the train tracks. His mother's sharp intake of breath told him she finally understood the seriousness of the situation. "Oh my God. Jake, don't move. I'm calling 911 right now." "No," Jake said quickly. "The man doing this is Mr. Wellington from the big estate. You know how Sheriff Davis is always playing golf with him. They might not believe us." His mother was silent for a moment. Jake knew she was weighing his words. The Wellington influence in their small town was considerable. Frederick Wellington owned half the businesses downtown and was the biggest taxpayer in the county. The local police were notoriously deferential to him. "Okay," she finally said. "I'll call Mark first. He'll know what to do. But Jake, promise me you'll stay hidden and safe." "I promise, Mom, but please hurry. The horse is hurt, and he needs help." After ending the call, Jake put his phone away and turned back to Thunder. The horse stood quietly, his breathing steady despite the strange surroundings. Jake stroked his neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the smooth coat. "Help is coming," he told Thunder softly. "My Uncle Mark knows all about horses. He used to work at a rescue center before he got his farm. He'll know how to make your leg better." Thunder lowered his head slightly, as if in acknowledgement. Jake leaned his forehead against the horse's shoulder, drawing comfort from the animal's steady presence. Outside, the night had grown completely dark. Through the end of the pipe, Jake could see stars appearing in the clear sky. The sounds of the search party had faded into the distance, but Jake knew Wellington wouldn't give up easily. The man had too much pride, too much at stake. Uncle Mark would come. Jake had to believe that. Until then, all he and Thunder could do was wait in their concrete refuge, two unlikely allies against the cruelty of a man who saw life only in terms of profit and loss. Time passed with excruciating slowness inside the drainage pipe. Jake sat on the damp concrete, one hand always on Thunder, speaking softly to the horse whenever he grew restless. The cold seeped through Jake's clothes, making him shiver, but he didn't complain. Thunder was suffering far more, standing on 3 legs as much as possible to relieve the pressure on his injured foreleg. "Just a little longer," Jake promised, though he had no idea how soon help would arrive. His phone battery was down to 15%, and he'd turned off the ringer to avoid giving away their position if Wellington and his men returned. Jake's thoughts turned to Jenkins, the older stable hand who had helped them escape. What would happen to him? Would Wellington fire him for his small act of defiance? The man had looked genuinely distressed at the plan to tie Thunder to the tracks. Jake hoped he wouldn't suffer too much for his kindness. The sound of approaching footsteps made Jake freeze. He placed a steadying hand on Thunder's neck, willing the horse to remain silent. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the creek. "Jake?" A familiar voice called, barely above a whisper. "Jake, are you in there?" Relief flooded through Jake. "Uncle Mark," he called back softly, scrambling toward the entrance of the pipe. "We're in here." The tall figure of his uncle appeared at the mouth of the drainage pipe, his familiar plaid jacket and worn baseball cap silhouetted against the night sky. Mark Miller was Jake's father's younger brother, a man whose gentle way with animals had always fascinated Jake. After years working at an equine rescue center 2 counties over, Uncle Mark had finally saved enough to buy his own small farm where he rehabilitated injured horses. "Jake, thank God," Mark said, crouching down to peer into the pipe. His flashlight illuminated Thunder, who blinked at the sudden light. "Your mother is worried sick. She's waiting back at my truck." "Is she mad?" Jake asked, suddenly remembering that he'd broken several family rules tonight. Mark's face softened. "She's just glad you're safe." "But Jake, what on earth is going on? Your mom said something about Frederick Wellington and train tracks?" Jake quickly explained everything, finding Wellington and his men with Thunder, overhearing their plan, the escape, and the pursuit with dogs. As he spoke, Mark's expression grew increasingly grim. That's attempted animal cruelty, insurance fraud, and endangering a minor all rolled into one, Mark said when Jake finished. Wellington could face serious charges for this. If anyone believes us, Jake said. Mom said the sheriff might not listen because he's friends with Mr. Wellington. Mark's jaw tightened. Let me worry about that. Right now, we need to get this horse to safety. Can he walk? Jake nodded. He's been really brave, but his leg is hurting him bad. Mark ducked into the pipe, moving slowly so as not to startle Thunder. With gentle hands, he examined the horse's injured leg, his touch expert and confident. Tendon injury, he murmured. Serious, but not beyond recovery with proper care. He looked up at Thunder's face, noting the white blaze that ran down his forehead. This is Thunder, isn't it? Wellington's prize racer? Jake nodded. You know him? I've seen him race, Mark said. Incredible animal. Won the Carter Stakes by 5 lengths last year. He shook his head in disgust. And Wellington was going to kill him over a treatable injury. Some people don't deserve the animals in their care. Mark straightened up, his mind clearly working on a plan. My trailer is about a quarter-mile from here, hidden on the old logging road. We need to get Thunder there without Wellington's men spotting us. They have dogs, Jake reminded him. I came prepared for that, Mark said, pulling a small bottle from his pocket. Anise oil. It'll mask your scent and confuse the dogs. Used to use it when I worked search and rescue with the K9 units. He dabbed some of the strong-smelling oil on Jake's clothes and on Thunder's legs. The horse sniffed curiously, but didn't seem bothered by the scent. Ready? Mark asked, taking the lead rope from Jake. We'll move along the creek a bit further, then cut through the pine grove to reach my truck. It's the long way around, but we'll stay off the main paths. Jake nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the evening's events. With an adult now taking charge, the fear and adrenaline that had kept him going began to subside, leaving him exhausted. They emerged from the drainage pipe, Thunder moving carefully behind Mark, who handled the lead rope with practiced ease. Jake followed, keeping one hand on Thunder's flank to reassure the horse. The forest was quiet now, with only the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of leaves disturbing the silence. Wellington and his men seemed to have moved their search elsewhere, at least for the moment. As they waded through the shallow water of the creek, Jake's thoughts returned to Wellington. Why would a man so wealthy, with so many resources, resort to such a cruel plan? Surely there were other options for an injured racehorse: retirement, rehabilitation, even selling to a less competitive stable. Uncle Mark, Jake whispered as they walked. Why would Mr. Wellington want to kill Thunder instead of just selling him or something? Mark glanced back, his expression somber in the moonlight. It's complicated, Jake. Racehorses like Thunder are insured for millions. If Thunder died in an accident, Wellington would collect the full insurance value. If he sold him as injured, he'd get a fraction of that. So it's just about money? Jake asked, the concept both simple and impossible to grasp. How could anyone value money over a life? For men like Wellington, it's always about money, Mark replied. But it's about pride, too. Thunder was supposed to be his ticket into the elite racing circles, the Derby, maybe even the Triple Crown. With that gone, Mark shrugged. Some men can't handle failure, especially public failure. They fell silent as they left the creek, cutting through a dense stand of pine trees. The soft carpet of needles muffled their footsteps, providing welcome relief from the noisy splashing of the creek. Thunder was moving more slowly now, his injury clearly causing him increasing pain. Mark noticed and paused, giving the horse a moment to rest. He's being so brave, Jake said, stroking Thunder's neck. He must know we're trying to help him. Mark nodded. Horses are intuitive. They know who they can trust. He looked at Jake with newfound respect. What you did tonight was dangerous, but it was also incredibly brave. You saved his life, Jake. Jake felt a flush of pride at his uncle's words, but before he could respond, the distant sound of barking dogs shattered the night stillness. The search had circled back toward them. "They're coming this way," Mark said, his voice tense. "We need to move faster." Thunder's ears pricked forward at the sound of the dogs, his body tensing as if ready to bolt despite his injury. "It's okay, boy," Jake soothed, though his own heart was racing. "We're almost safe." They picked up their pace, Mark leading them through the trees with the confidence of someone who knew these woods well. The barking grew louder, then suddenly stopped, a sign the dogs had been called to heel, perhaps because Wellington thought he'd found their trail. "There's the logging road," Mark whispered, pointing ahead to a narrow dirt track barely visible in the moonlight. "My truck and trailer are just around that bend." Hope surged through Jake. They were going to make it. Thunder would be safe. Then a bright light blinded them and a familiar voice called out from the darkness beyond. "That's far enough," Frederick Wellington said, stepping into view with a shotgun in his hands. "The horse comes with me." The shotgun in Wellington's hands gleamed in the moonlight, its barrel pointing not directly at them, but close enough to make his threat clear. Behind him stood Davis, holding the leashes of 2 German shepherds that strained and growled, eager to be released. Mark pushed Jake slightly behind him, his body language protective, but not fearful. "Frederick," he said calmly, as if addressing an old acquaintance rather than a man with a weapon, "put the gun down. You don't want to add armed threats to the charges you're already facing." Wellington's laugh was hollow. "Charges? There won't be any charges. It's my word against a stable hand, a horse trainer, and a child. Who do you think people will believe in this town?" "You'd be surprised," Mark replied, his voice steady. "Times are changing, Frederick. People care about animal cruelty these days. And attempted insurance fraud? That's federal. Not even your golf buddies at the sheriff's office can help you there." Jake could see Wellington's confident facade crack slightly at Mark's words. The man adjusted his grip on the shotgun, his knuckles whitening. "This is my horse," Wellington said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I paid for him. I trained him. I own him. The law is clear on that." "The law also says you can't abuse an animal," Jake found himself saying, stepping out from behind his uncle despite Mark's attempt to keep him back. "Or try to kill it for money." Wellington's cold eyes fixed on Jake. "You should have stayed out of this, boy. This isn't some fairy tale where the child hero saves the day. This is business." "It's not business," Jake replied, surprised at the steadiness in his own voice. "It's wrong, and you know it's wrong, or you wouldn't have tried to make it look like an accident." Something flashed in Wellington's eyes. Anger, certainly, but also something else. Shame, perhaps. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Davis," Wellington said without taking his eyes off Jake. "Get the horse." Davis handed the dog leashes to Wellington and stepped forward, a coil of rope in his hands. Thunder, sensing the man's intentions, backed away, pressing against Jake's side. The horse's eyes were wide with fear, his nostrils flaring. "He stays with us," Mark said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He didn't move toward Wellington's gun, but his stance made it clear that he wouldn't surrender Thunder without a fight. Davis hesitated, looking between Mark and Wellington. The standoff stretched, the forest around them silent except for the panting of the dogs. From somewhere behind them, a woman's voice cut through the tension. "Jake? Mark? Where are you?" Jake recognized his mother's voice immediately. "Mom," he called back, relief flooding through him. "Over here." "Quiet," Wellington hissed, raising the shotgun slightly. But it was too late. Sarah Miller emerged from the trees, her expression changing from worry to alarm as she took in the scene. Wellington with his shotgun, Davis standing halfway between the two groups, and her son and brother with the injured racehorse. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp with maternal fear and anger. She moved to Jake's side, placing a protective arm around his shoulders. Wellington's face twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Miller, your son has stolen my property. I'm simply recovering what's mine." "With a shotgun?" Sarah's voice was incredulous. "Pointed at a child? My child?" "The gun is just a precaution," Wellington said, lowering it slightly as if to prove his point. "Your son and brother are the ones trespassing and stealing." Sarah's gaze moved to Thunder, noting his injured leg and the fear in his eyes. Then she looked at Jake, who met her gaze steadily. "He was going to tie Thunder to the train tracks, Mom," Jake said. "I heard him say it was for the insurance money." Sarah's face hardened as she turned back to Wellington. "Is this true?" "Of course not," Wellington scoffed. "The boy is making up stories. I was simply transporting an injured horse to a second property for treatment." "At night, near train tracks with rope?" Mark challenged. "That's not how anyone transports a horse for medical care, and you know it." Wellington's expression darkened. "Enough of this. Davis, get the horse. Now." Davis moved forward again, more decisively this time. Mark stepped to intercept him, but Wellington raised the shotgun once more. "Stay where you are, Miller," Wellington warned. What happened next occurred so quickly that Jake could barely process it. Thunder, frightened by Davis's approach and the escalating tension, reared up suddenly, pulling the lead rope from Mark's grasp. The horse's front hooves pawed at the air, his injured leg momentarily forgotten in his panic. Davis stumbled backward, falling to the ground. Wellington, startled by the horse's sudden movement, jerked the shotgun upward. The dogs barked frantically, straining at their leashes. "Thunder!" Jake called out, breaking free from his mother's grasp and moving toward the frightened animal. "Jake, no!" Sarah cried, reaching for her son. Wellington, his composure shattered by the chaos, swung the shotgun toward the movement. His finger tensed on the trigger. Mark saw it happening and lunged forward, grabbing the barrel of the shotgun just as Wellington pulled the trigger. The gun discharged into the air with a deafening blast that echoed through the forest. Birds scattered from nearby trees, their wings flapping in panic. Thunder bolted at the sound, his fear overriding the pain in his leg. He galloped past Wellington, nearly trampling the man as he fled into the darkness. "No!" Jake shouted, watching helplessly as the injured horse disappeared into the trees. In the confusion, Mark had wrestled the shotgun from Wellington's hands. Davis was scrambling to his feet, and the dogs, freed from their leashes when Wellington dropped them to grab for his gun, were running in circles, barking madly, but trained well enough not to chase without command. "You idiots!" Wellington raged, his face contorted with fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? That horse is worth millions." "That horse is a living creature," Sarah shot back, her arm once again around Jake's shoulders. "Not just a dollar sign." Wellington turned his cold gaze on her. "Your son has interfered with my business, trespassed on my property, and stolen my horse. I'll have him charged with every possible offense. By the time I'm done, your family won't have a penny left to your name." Sarah didn't flinch. "And we'll tell everyone what you were planning to do. Every news outlet, every animal rights group, everyone who might be interested in how Frederick Wellington treats his investments when they don't perform as expected." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Wellington's face. He was a businessman, above all else. He understood the value of his reputation, how quickly public opinion could turn, how devastating a scandal could be. "You have no proof," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "We have Jenkins," Mark replied. "Your stable manager seemed pretty uncomfortable with your plan. I doubt he'll lie under oath to protect you." Wellington's expression hardened again. "Jenkins is an employee who will say whatever I tell him to say." "Maybe," Mark conceded. "But are you willing to bet your reputation on that? Your business? Your standing in the community?" As the adults continued their tense standoff, Jake's thoughts were only with Thunder. The injured horse was out there somewhere, frightened and in pain, running on a leg that needed rest and treatment. If they didn't find him soon, he might injure himself even more severely. "Uncle Mark," Jake said urgently, tugging at his uncle's sleeve, "we need to find Thunder. His leg, he could hurt himself worse." Mark nodded, never taking his eyes off Wellington. "You're right, Jake." He addressed Wellington again, his voice firm. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to find that horse and get him the medical care he needs. You're going to leave us alone to do that. And tomorrow, we're all going to have a conversation with the proper authorities about exactly what happened here tonight." Wellington stared at Mark, calculation evident in his cold eyes. The man was weighing his options, considering the potential damage to his reputation against the loss of his investment. Jake held his breath, praying that self-interest would win out over vengeance. "This isn't over," Wellington finally said, his voice low and threatening, not by a long shot. He turned to Davis. "Get the dogs. We're leaving." Davis hesitated. "But sir, the horse—" "I said we're leaving," Wellington snapped. "Now." As Davis collected the dogs, Wellington fixed Jake with a stare that made the boy's skin crawl. "Remember this moment, boy. You've made an enemy today. One day you'll understand what that means." Jake stood his ground, though his heart hammered in his chest. He'd never been threatened by an adult before, never felt the weight of genuine malice directed at him. It was terrifying, but he refused to show fear. "I'd rather have Thunder as a friend than you as anything," Jake replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Something like surprise flickered across Wellington's face before it hardened again. Without another word, he turned and stalked back toward the logging road, Davis and the dogs following behind him. Only when the sound of Wellington's SUV had faded into the distance did Jake let out the breath he'd been holding. His legs suddenly felt weak, the adrenaline that had kept him going beginning to ebb. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, kneeling in front of her son, her hands checking him for injuries with gentle concern. Jake nodded. "I'm fine, Mom, but we need to find Thunder. He's hurt, and now he's out there all alone and scared." Sarah looked to Mark, who was scanning the trees in the direction Thunder had fled. "Can we find him in the dark?" "We have to try," Mark said, his expression grim. "With that leg injury, he shouldn't be running at all. The more he moves, the worse it could get. And these woods aren't safe at night. There are ravines, barbed wire fences from the old property lines." He handed the confiscated shotgun to Sarah. "Take this back to the truck. We can't leave it out here, and I don't want to carry it while we're searching." Sarah nodded, taking the weapon gingerly. "What about Wellington? Do you think he's really leaving?" "For now," Mark said. "He's a businessman. He needs time to regroup, figure out his next move. But Jake's right. We need to find Thunder before we worry about Wellington." Sarah looked torn, clearly concerned about her son's safety, but understanding the urgency of finding the injured horse. "I'll put this in the truck and come right back to help search." As she headed toward the logging road, Mark turned to Jake. "Which way do you think Thunder went?" Jake pointed without hesitation. "That way, toward the creek. I saw him go between those two big oak trees." Mark nodded, impressed by Jake's attentiveness even in the chaos. "Good eye. Let's go, but stay close to me. No running off on your own, okay?" "Okay," Jake promised, already moving in the direction Thunder had fled. They entered the dense forest, Mark's flashlight sweeping across the undergrowth, looking for signs of the horse's passage. Jake kept his eyes on the ground, searching for hoof prints or broken branches. "Thunder," Jake called, not too loudly. He didn't want to spook the horse further if he was nearby. "Thunder, it's okay. You're safe now." Mark placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "When we find him, he'll be frightened. Let me approach first, okay? An injured, scared horse can be dangerous, even unintentionally." Jake nodded, understanding the wisdom in his uncle's words. Still, he couldn't help feeling that Thunder would recognize him, would know that Jake meant only to help. They continued their search, moving carefully through the darkness. The moon provided some light, but the forest canopy created deep shadows that made the going slow and treacherous. After about 10 minutes, Sarah caught up with them, bringing another flashlight from the truck. "Any sign of him?" she asked. Mark shook his head. "Not yet, but he can't have gone too far with that injury." They spread out slightly, staying within sight of each other, calling Thunder's name and scanning the ground for tracks. Jake's worry grew with each passing minute. What if Thunder had fallen somewhere? What if his leg had given out completely? "There!" Sarah suddenly called, her flashlight beam fixed on the ground. "Hoof prints!" Mark and Jake hurried over. Sure enough, there were clear impressions in a patch of soft earth, the distinctive marks of a horse's hooves. "Good eye," Mark said, examining the tracks. "He's definitely favoring that left foreleg. See how the right print is deeper? He's putting more weight on it." They followed the trail, hope rising as the tracks became more frequent and easier to follow. Thunder was moving more slowly now, his initial panic subsiding, or his injury forcing him to reduce his pace. The tracks led them toward a small clearing where a fallen tree created a natural barrier, and there, standing in the moonlight, was Thunder. The horse was breathing heavily, his coat dark with sweat, his injured leg barely touching the ground. He looked exhausted and in pain, but mercifully still standing. "Thunder," Jake whispered, relief washing over him. The horse's head came up at the sound of Jake's voice, ears pricked forward in recognition. He gave a soft whicker, almost like a greeting. "Stay here," Mark said quietly to Jake and Sarah. "Let me check him over first." Mark approached Thunder slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice. "Easy, boy. Easy now. No one's going to hurt you." Thunder watched him warily, but didn't move away. When Mark was close enough, he carefully reached out and took hold of the dangling lead rope. Only then did he gesture for Jake to approach. Jake moved forward slowly, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and concern. "Hey, Thunder," he said softly. "You really scared us, running off like that." To both Mark and Sarah's surprise, Thunder lowered his head to Jake, allowing the boy to stroke his sweaty neck. The horse seemed to relax under Jake's touch, some of the tension leaving his powerful body. "He trusts you," Mark said, genuine admiration in his voice. "That's rare, especially with a thoroughbred like him. They're usually high-strung, especially when injured." Jake continued to stroke Thunder's neck, murmuring reassurances. "It's okay now. We won't let anyone hurt you." Mark carefully examined Thunder's injured leg, his expression growing more concerned. "The running has definitely made it worse. We need to get him to my place as soon as possible. The trailer's not far, but I'm worried about him walking even that distance." Sarah stepped forward. "What can we do?" "We'll have to go slowly. Keep him calm," Mark said. "Jake, you stay with him. He seems most comfortable with you. I'll lead. And Sarah, you follow behind us with the flashlight." Jake nodded, accepting the responsibility without hesitation. As they began the slow journey back to the logging road, he kept one hand on Thunder's neck, talking to him constantly in a low, soothing voice. "You're the bravest horse I've ever met," Jake told Thunder. "Most horses would have given up by now, but not you. You're a fighter." Thunder walked beside Jake, his steps careful but steady. Every now and then he would turn his head slightly, as if checking that Jake was still there. Each time, Jake would offer a reassuring pat or word. The bond forming between boy and horse was obvious, touching even Sarah, who had always been somewhat wary of large animals. "I've never seen anything like it," she whispered to Mark as they walked. "It's like they understand each other." Mark nodded. "Some people have a gift with animals. Jake seems to be one of them." They reached the logging road without incident, where Mark's truck and horse trailer waited. Now came the challenging part, getting an injured, traumatized horse to enter the confined space of a trailer. The horse trailer loomed before them, its dark interior likely appearing to Thunder like a metal cave. Mark had backed it up to a relatively flat area of the logging road. The rear doors open wide, and a ramp extended down to the ground. Under normal circumstances, loading a trained racehorse into a trailer wouldn't be particularly difficult. But these were far from normal circumstances. "He's scared," Jake said, feeling Thunder tense beside him as they approached the trailer. The horse's nostrils flared, and he pulled back slightly on the lead rope. Mark nodded. "After everything he's been through tonight, I'm not surprised. We need to take this slow, let him set the pace." Sarah stood back, holding the flashlight so that the area was well lit but not blinding. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "Just keep the light steady," Mark said. "We don't want any sudden movements or changes that might startle him." Mark handed the lead rope to Jake. "I think you should be the one to load him. He trusts you more than anyone right now." Jake's eyes widened. "Me? But I've never loaded a horse before." "I'll talk you through it," Mark assured him. "But I think Thunder will respond better to you than to me. Just move confidently and calmly, and he'll pick up on that." Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility. Thunder's well-being depended on getting him safely to Mark's farm, where his injury could be properly treated. He took a deep breath and stroked Thunder's neck reassuringly. "Okay, Thunder," he said softly. "We need to get in this trailer so we can take you somewhere safe. It's not scary, I promise." Mark instructed Jake to walk confidently toward the trailer ramp, not pulling on the lead rope but not giving Thunder too much slack either. "Think of it as inviting him to follow you, not forcing him." Jake did as his uncle suggested, taking slow, deliberate steps toward the trailer. Thunder hesitated, his ears flicking back and forth as he assessed the situation. For a moment, Jake thought the horse might refuse, might pull back and possibly injure himself further in panic. "It's okay, boy," Jake murmured, turning to face Thunder. Their eyes met, and Jake tried to convey all his sincerity and care in that gaze. "I wouldn't ask you to do this if it wasn't to help you. I promise." Whether Thunder understood the words, or simply responded to the tone and the trust that had been building between them, the horse took a tentative step forward, then another. Jake continued to encourage him, backing slowly up the ramp as Thunder followed, one careful step at a time. When Thunder's front hooves touched the metal ramp, he paused again, the unfamiliar sensation and sound clearly making him nervous. Jake remained patient, giving the horse time to adjust. Mark and Sarah watched in silence, not wanting to break the delicate connection between boy and horse. "You've got this," Jake encouraged. "Just a few more steps." After what seemed like an eternity, Thunder was fully inside the trailer. Mark quickly moved in to secure the partition and close the rear doors, making sure Thunder was positioned comfortably for the ride. "You did it," Sarah said, giving Jake a quick hug. "That was amazing." Jake felt a rush of pride, but also concern for Thunder. "Will he be okay during the drive?" "We'll go slow," Mark promised, securing the last latch on the trailer door. "It's only about 15 minutes to my place if we take the back roads." As they prepared to leave, Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his friend Charlie. "Dude, where are you? Wellington's goons are at your house looking for you." Jake showed the message to his mother, his earlier fear returning. "Wellington's not giving up," he said. Sarah's expression hardened as she read the message. "Of course he's not. Men like that don't accept defeat easily." "We need to get moving," Mark said, ushering them toward the truck. "The sooner we get Thunder somewhere safe, the better." They climbed into Mark's pickup, Jake sandwiched between his mother and uncle in the single bench seat. As they pulled away, Jake couldn't help looking back at the trailer, worrying about Thunder inside. "He'll be okay," Mark assured him, noticing his concern. Thoroughbreds are transported all the time between races. He's probably been in plenty of trailers before. "But not with an injured leg," Jake pointed out. Mark nodded, acknowledging the point. "True, but we're going slow and steady. No sharp turns or sudden stops." They drove in silence for a while, the truck's headlights illuminating the narrow back roads that wound through the countryside. Jake's mind raced with questions about what would happen next. Would Wellington really press charges against him? Would he find a way to get Thunder back? "What happens when we get to your farm?" Jake finally asked. "Wellington still legally owns Thunder, doesn't he?" Mark and Sarah exchanged glances. "Legally, yes," Mark admitted, "but proving animal cruelty can change that. If we can document his injuries and get Jenkins to testify about Wellington's plans, we might be able to have Thunder officially removed from his ownership." "And if we can't?" Jake pressed. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Let's take this one step at a time, okay? First priority is getting Thunder's injury treated." They turned onto a gravel driveway marked by a simple wooden sign, "Miller Equine Rehabilitation." The headlights swept across a modest farmhouse and a large barn beyond it. Several fenced paddocks stretched into the darkness, and a few curious horses approached the fence line as the truck's engine alerted them to visitors. "Home sweet home," Mark said, pulling up close to the barn. He'd already called ahead to his assistant, Miguel, who was waiting for them with the barn lights on and a stall prepared. Miguel, a stocky man in his 40s with kind eyes and capable hands, helped Mark back the trailer up to the barn entrance. "Everything's ready," he reported. "I've got fresh bedding in the stall, water, and the vet supplies you asked for." "Thanks, Miguel," Mark said. "This is my nephew Jake and my sister Sarah. Jake's the one who saved this horse from a bad situation." Miguel nodded respectfully to Jake. "Brave thing to do, young man." Jake felt a flush of pride, but his focus was on Thunder. "Can we get him out now? He must be uncomfortable in there." Unloading Thunder proved easier than loading him had been. The horse seemed to sense that he'd arrived somewhere safe, and despite his obvious pain and exhaustion, he followed Jake out of the trailer and into the barn with little hesitation. The stall prepared for Thunder was spacious and deeply bedded with clean straw. A water bucket and small portion of hay waited in the corner. Jake led Thunder inside, and the horse immediately lowered his head to sniff the fresh bedding. "He looks relieved," Sarah observed. "He knows he's safe," Mark said. "Horses are incredibly perceptive that way." While Miguel helped Mark gather medical supplies, Jake stayed with Thunder, stroking his neck and murmuring reassurances. The horse's coat was still damp with sweat, his breathing faster than normal. "You're going to get better here," Jake promised. "Uncle Mark helps horses like you all the time." Mark returned with a medical kit and a bucket of warm water. "Let's get him cleaned up and see exactly what we're dealing with," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Jake, if you can keep talking to him and keeping him calm, that would be a big help." As Mark carefully examined Thunder's injured leg, cleaning it and feeling gently for the extent of the damage, Jake maintained a steady stream of soft conversation with the horse. Thunder occasionally shifted his weight when Mark touched a particularly sensitive spot, but overall remained remarkably patient. "Well?" Sarah asked when Mark finally straightened up. "Significant tendon damage," Mark confirmed, "but not as catastrophic as Wellington made it out to be. With proper rest, cold therapy, and eventually some controlled exercise, he could recover quite well." Jake felt a surge of hope. "So he'll be okay?" Mark smiled at his nephew's eagerness. "It's going to take time, months, not weeks. But yes, with the right care, Thunder has an excellent chance of making a good recovery." Dawn broke over Mark's farm, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Jake, who had refused to leave Thunder's side all night, sat on a bale of hay outside the stall, fighting to keep his eyes open. His mother had reluctantly gone home to get some rest and check on their house, promising to return with fresh clothes and breakfast. Mark approached with 2 steaming mugs, handing one to Jake. "Hot chocolate. Thought you could use it." Jake accepted the mug gratefully, letting the warmth seep into his tired hands. "Thanks, Uncle Mark." Mark settled beside him on the hay bale, his own mug of coffee sending spirals of steam into the cool morning air. "You should get some sleep, Jake. Thunder's safe now." Jake shook his head, glancing at the horse who dozed lightly in his stall, his injured leg wrapped in a cooling bandage. "I don't want him to wake up alone in a strange place." Mark smiled at his nephew's dedication. "He's lucky to have found you." "I'm lucky to have found him," Jake corrected, taking a sip of his hot chocolate. "Do you think Wellington will really try to take him back?" Mark's expression grew serious. "I won't lie to you, Jake. Legally, Thunder still belongs to Wellington. No matter what he was planning to do, the law sees horses as property." "That's not fair," Jake said, his voice rising slightly. Thunder's ears flicked toward the sound, and Jake immediately lowered his tone. "He's not just property. He feels things. He knows when people care about him or want to hurt him." "I know," Mark agreed, "and there are animal cruelty laws that could help us. But Wellington has resources, money, lawyers, connections. This won't be an easy fight." Jake set his mug down, his jaw set with determination. "I'm not giving up on Thunder, no matter what." "I'd expect nothing less," Mark said, pride evident in his voice. "And you won't be fighting alone." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Sarah's car pulled up outside the barn, and moments later she appeared, carrying a grocery bag and looking anxious. "Any trouble at home?" Mark asked as she approached. Sarah shook her head. "No sign of Wellington or his men, but Charlie's mom called. Apparently there are rumors all over town about Jake stealing Wellington's prize racehorse." Jake's heart sank. Of course, Wellington would spin the story that way. "There's more," Sarah said, lowering her voice. "Wellington's lawyer has already contacted the sheriff's office. They may be coming here with a court order to take Thunder back." Mark stood up, his expression hardening. "They can try. But I've already called Diane Morris from the state's animal welfare office. She's an old friend from my rescue center days. She'll be here in a couple of hours to document Thunder's condition." "Can she stop them from taking him?" Jake asked hopefully. "Not by herself," Mark admitted. "But her report will be official evidence if this goes to court. And I've got calls into a few media contacts too. Nothing makes a man like Wellington more nervous than public scrutiny." Sarah handed Jake a sandwich from her bag. "Eat something. You need your strength." Jake took the sandwich but couldn't muster much appetite. His mind was racing with worries about what might happen next. Would the sheriff really come and take Thunder away? Would Wellington get away with what he'd planned to do? As if sensing his distress, Thunder nickered softly from his stall. Jake immediately went to him, offering his palm for the horse to sniff. Thunder gently nudged Jake's hand, then lowered his head to allow the boy to stroke his forehead. "I won't let them take you," Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise." Mark watched the interaction with a thoughtful expression. After a moment, he pulled Sarah aside. "I have an idea," he said quietly. "It's a long shot, but it might work." While Mark outlined his plan to Sarah, Jake remained with Thunder, talking softly to the horse about nothing in particular: school, his friends, his dreams of maybe working with animals someday. Thunder listened attentively, his intelligent eyes fixed on Jake as if understanding every word. Their peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside the barn. Jake's heart raced as he heard car doors slamming and voices approaching. Mark stepped protectively in front of the stall as Sheriff Davis entered the barn, followed by two deputies, Wellington's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, and finally, Frederick Wellington himself. The businessman's cold eyes swept the barn before settling on Thunder with a proprietary gaze that made Jake's skin crawl. "Mark Miller," Sheriff Davis said, his tone official but not unfriendly. "We have a court order to recover Mr. Wellington's property." He held out a document which Mark took and examined carefully. "This horse is injured and under veterinary care," Mark replied calmly. "Moving him could exacerbate his condition." Wellington's lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Wellington has his own veterinary team ready to assume care of the animal. Your concern, while noted, is irrelevant to the legal matter at hand." Jake couldn't contain himself any longer. "He was going to kill Thunder," he blurted out. "He was going to tie him to the train tracks for insurance money." Sheriff Davis looked uncomfortable, glancing between Jake and Wellington. "Son, that's a serious accusation." "It's also completely false," Wellington said smoothly. "This boy trespassed on my property and stole a valuable racehorse. Any reasonable person can see which story is more credible." "What about Jenkins?" Jake challenged. "Ask your stable manager what really happened." A flicker of unease crossed Wellington's face before he regained his composure. "Jenkins is no longer in my employ. He decided to pursue other opportunities quite suddenly." "How convenient," Sarah muttered, earning a sharp look from Wellington's lawyer. The tension in the barn was palpable. Thunder, sensing the conflict, grew restless in his stall, shifting his weight nervously despite his injury. "Sheriff," Mark said, still calm but with steel in his voice, "I understand you have a job to do, but I'm asking you to wait just 1 hour. A state animal welfare officer is on her way to document this horse's condition. Surely that's a reasonable request." Sheriff Davis hesitated, clearly torn between his duty and his sense of fairness. Wellington's lawyer interjected before he could respond. "The court order is quite clear, Sheriff. There's no provision for delay." "Actually," a new voice called from the barn entrance, "there is." All heads turned to see a woman in her 50s with a state government ID badge clipped to her jacket. Diane Morris had arrived earlier than expected, and she was not alone. Behind her stood a cameraman with a local news station logo on his equipment, and beside him, looking uncomfortable but determined, was Jenkins. "I've received multiple reports of alleged animal cruelty involving this horse," Diane announced, her official tone brooking no argument. "As a representative of the State Animal Welfare Office, I have the authority to place this animal under temporary protective custody pending investigation." Wellington's face darkened with fury. "This is absurd. Sheriff, do your job and enforce the court order." Sheriff Davis looked between Wellington and the state official, clearly weighing his options. "Ma'am, I have a valid court order here. And I have state statutes that supersede local court orders in cases of suspected animal cruelty," Diane countered, stepping forward to hand the sheriff a document of her own. "You're welcome to contact the judge who issued that order, but I think you'll find my authority is quite clear in this matter." While this confrontation unfolded, Jake noticed Jenkins slowly making his way around the edge of the group, moving closer to Thunder's stall. When their eyes met, the stable manager gave Jake a small, almost imperceptible nod of reassurance. Wellington's composure cracked at the sight of Jenkins. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Jenkins, what do you think you're doing?" Jenkins straightened his shoulders, meeting his former employer's gaze with newfound courage. "The right thing, sir. Something I should have done from the beginning." The cameraman, sensing the tension, had begun filming. Wellington's lawyer noticed and quickly stepped in front of her client, placing a hand on his arm in warning. "Mr. Wellington, I advise you to remain silent at this time." But Wellington shook her off. his face flushed with anger. "I paid you well, Jenkins. Better than you deserved. And this is how you repay me? With disloyalty?" "Loyalty doesn't extend to criminal acts, Mr. Wellington," Jenkins replied quietly. "I've worked with horses my entire life. What do you plan to do to Thunder?" He shook his head. "I couldn't live with myself if I didn't speak up." The reporter who had accompanied the cameraman stepped forward. "Mr. Jenkins, are you willing to go on record about what Mr. Wellington intended to do with this horse?" Jenkins nodded, his expression solemn. "Yes, I am." Wellington's lawyer tried again to intervene. "This is outrageous. These unfounded allegations." "Are they unfounded?" Diane Morris cut in, her voice sharp. She turned to Jenkins. "Please, Mr. Jenkins, tell us what happened last night." All eyes turned to Jenkins, who took a deep breath before speaking. "Mr. Wellington instructed Davis and me to take Thunder to the train tracks after his injury at the race," he said. Jenkins paused, glancing at Jake before continuing. "He said it would look like an accident, that the insurance would pay out in full, but only if the horse died in what appeared to be a tragic incident rather than being euthanized for his injury." The reporter's eyebrows shot up. "Are you saying Mr. Wellington planned to deliberately kill a valuable racehorse for insurance money?" "Objection," Wellington's lawyer exclaimed, then caught herself, realizing she wasn't in court. "I mean, this is hearsay and slander. Mr. Jenkins has no proof of these alleged instructions." "Actually," Jenkins said, pulling out his phone, "I do. I've worked for Mr. Wellington for 15 years. I know how he operates. So last night, when he gave us those orders, I recorded our conversation." He looked directly at Wellington. "I never thought I'd need it, sir. I hoped you'd change your mind." The color drained from Wellington's face. His lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear, but he seemed frozen in place, staring at Jenkins with a mixture of shock and rage. Sheriff Davis, who had been listening with increasing concern, stepped forward. "I think we need to take this conversation down to the station," he said, his official demeanor returning. "Mr. Jenkins, if you'd be willing to make a formal statement." "Of course," Jenkins agreed. "And I'll need that recording as evidence," the sheriff added. Wellington finally found his voice. "This is a setup," he snarled. "The boy stole my horse, and now you're all conspiring against me. Do you have any idea who I am in this community? Who signs your paychecks, Davis?" The sheriff's expression hardened. "I'm paid by the county, Mr. Wellington, and right now I'm doing my job." He turned to his deputies. "Please escort Mr. Wellington to the station. We have some questions for him." "You can't be serious," Wellington's lawyer protested. "My client hasn't been charged with anything. This is harassment." "Insurance fraud is a serious offense, ma'am," Sheriff Davis replied, "and animal cruelty is something we take very seriously in this county." He glanced at Jake, who was watching wide-eyed from beside Thunder's stall. Some of us, anyway. As one of the deputies moved toward Wellington, the businessman's composure finally shattered completely. "This is all because of that boy," he shouted, pointing at Jake. "None of this would have happened if he had minded his own business. That horse is mine. Mine to race, mine to breed, mine to destroy if I see fit." The reporter's eyebrows shot up even further, and the cameraman zoomed in on Wellington's face as he continued his tirade. His lawyer looked horrified, trying desperately to silence him, but Wellington was beyond reason now, his carefully constructed public image crumbling under the weight of his rage. Jake, stunned by the outburst, felt Thunder press against him from inside the stall as if the horse were trying to shield him from Wellington's anger. Without thinking, Jake wrapped his arms around Thunder's neck, drawing comfort from the animal's steady presence. "Get that camera out of my face," Wellington demanded, lunging toward the cameraman. The sudden movement startled everyone, and in the confusion, Wellington broke free from the deputy's grasp and rushed toward Jake and Thunder. "If I can't have that horse, no one will," he shouted, his face contorted with fury. Mark reacted instantly, stepping between Wellington and the stall. "That's enough, Frederick," he said firmly, standing his ground as Wellington charged toward him. The collision sent both men stumbling. Wellington, in his blind rage, took a wild swing at Mark, who ducked the blow. Sheriff Davis and his deputy rushed forward, grabbing Wellington's arms and restraining him as he continued to struggle and shout threats. "Frederick Wellington, you're under arrest for assault," Sheriff Davis announced, nodding to his deputy to apply handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start exercising that right immediately." As Wellington was led away, still hurling threats and invectives, Jake remained with Thunder, his heart pounding from the confrontation. The horse nuzzled his shoulder gently, as if reassuring him that everything would be okay. Sarah rushed to Jake's side, checking him over with worried eyes. "Are you all right?" Jake nodded, still processing what had just happened. "He completely lost it," he said, disbelief evident in his voice. "Power and money can make some people think they're untouchable," Mark said, straightening his shirt where Wellington had grabbed it. "When that illusion breaks, they don't always handle it well." Diane Morris approached them, her expression serious but kind. "That was quite a scene," she said, "but it might have done us a favor. Between Jenkins' recording, multiple witnesses, and now Wellington's own outburst, we have a strong case for removing Thunder from his ownership permanently." Hope surged through Jake. "Really? You can do that?" "In cases of documented animal cruelty or attempted cruelty, yes," Diane confirmed. "It's not a simple process, but with the evidence we have, I believe we can make it happen." The reporter, who had been taking notes furiously throughout the confrontation, stepped forward. "Ms. Morris, would you be willing to give a statement about the Animal Welfare Office's position on this case?" As Diane spoke with the reporter, explaining the legal process for removing an animal from an abusive situation, Jake turned his attention back to Thunder. The horse seemed calmer now that Wellington was gone, his intelligent eyes watching Jake with what almost looked like gratitude. "We did it, boy," Jake whispered, stroking Thunder's neck. "He can't hurt you now." Mark overheard and placed a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. "It's not over yet, Jake. There will be hearings, paperwork, legal challenges. Wellington still has resources and connections." "But Thunder's safe for now, right?" Jake asked, needing reassurance. Mark nodded. "For now, yes. Diane has the authority to place him in protective custody while the investigation proceeds. And given what just happened, I doubt any judge would rule to return him to Wellington immediately." "And after that?" Jake pressed. "What happens to Thunder when all the legal stuff is done?" Mark and Sarah exchanged meaningful glances. "Let's take this one step at a time," Sarah said gently. "Right now, the important thing is that Thunder gets the care he needs for his injury." But Jake couldn't help thinking about the future. Where would Thunder go if he was permanently removed from Wellington's ownership? Who would care for him and ensure he was never mistreated again? As if reading his thoughts, Thunder nickered softly and pushed his nose against Jake's chest, seeking connection. Jake wrapped his arms around the horse's head, resting his cheek against Thunder's forehead. In that moment, Jake knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next, his life and Thunder's were now intertwined. This wasn't just about saving a horse from a cruel fate anymore. It was about finding a new beginning for both of them. 3 months passed. Summer gave way to autumn, painting the countryside in rich golds and fiery reds. At Mark's farm, Thunder stood in the paddock, his coat gleaming in the October sunlight. His injured leg, though still bearing a slight scar, now supported his weight without pain. The daily therapy sessions, cold treatments, and careful exercise regimen had worked wonders. Jake leaned against the fence, watching as Thunder trotted around the enclosure with increasing confidence. School had started again, but Jake spent every afternoon and weekend at his uncle's farm, dedicated to Thunder's recovery. "He's looking good," Mark said, joining his nephew at the fence. Dr. Patterson says his latest scan shows the tendon healing better than expected. Jake smiled, pride welling in his chest. He's a fighter. So much had changed since that fateful night. Wellington's arrest had made headlines across the state, the story of the wealthy racehorse owner who'd tried to kill his injured horse for insurance money capturing public attention. Jenkins' recording, combined with Wellington's own damning outburst, had provided irrefutable evidence of his intentions. The legal proceedings had moved surprisingly quickly. Wellington, facing charges of attempted insurance fraud, animal cruelty, and assault, had agreed to a plea deal that included surrendering ownership of Thunder. His reputation in tatters and his racing license revoked, the once powerful businessman had retreated to his estate, a shadow of his former self. "Any word on the adoption paperwork?" Jake asked, trying to sound casual, though his heart raced at the question. Mark smiled. "Actually, that's what I came to tell you. Diane called this morning. The judge signed off on everything. Thunder is officially ours." "Ours?" Jake repeated, his eyes widening. "Well, technically, he's registered to the rehabilitation center," Mark explained. "But since you're the one who saved him and has been instrumental in his recovery, we've listed you as his primary caretaker." Jake could hardly believe it. After months of uncertainty, of worrying that Thunder might be sold to another racing stable or breeding operation, the horse was going to stay with them, with him. "Does that mean—" Jake started, almost afraid to say the words aloud for fear of jinxing them. Mark nodded, understanding the unspoken question. "Yes. He's here to stay, Jake. This is his home now." Tears welled in Jake's eyes. He quickly wiped them away, embarrassed, but Mark pretended not to notice. Instead, he handed Jake an apple. "Why don't you go give him the good news?" Mark suggested. Jake climbed through the fence rails and approached Thunder, who immediately trotted over, recognizing his friend. Jake held out the apple, which Thunder accepted with gentle lips. "We did it, boy," Jake whispered, stroking the horse's neck as he crunched the apple. "You're staying with us, forever." Thunder nudged Jake's shoulder affectionately, as if he understood every word. The bond between them had only strengthened over the months of recovery. There were days when Thunder would allow no one but Jake to change his bandages or lead him through his therapy exercises. From the farmhouse porch, Sarah watched her son with the horse, a smile on her face. She'd been skeptical at first about Jake's intense commitment to Thunder's care, worrying it might interfere with his schoolwork and social life. But Jake had proven her wrong, managing his responsibilities with a maturity that surprised and impressed her. More than that, she'd seen her son transform. The quiet, sometimes hesitant boy had found his voice and his courage on that night by the train tracks. His teachers reported that he was more confident in class, more willing to speak up for what he believed in. He'd even started a petition at school to raise awareness about animal welfare issues. "He's going to work with animals someday," Sarah said as Mark joined her on the porch. "I can see it now." Mark nodded. "He has a gift, not just for handling them, but for understanding them. That's rare." In the paddock, Jake had begun leading Thunder through some gentle stretching exercises that the veterinarian had recommended. The horse followed Jake's guidance willingly, trusting him completely. "We're thinking of starting a youth program at the center," Mark said. "Teaching kids about horse care, rehabilitation, that sort of thing. I was hoping Jake might help." Sarah smiled. "He'd love that." Meanwhile, Jenkins had found a new purpose as well. After testifying against Wellington, he'd received job offers from several racing stables, but to everyone's surprise, he'd accepted a position at Mark's rehabilitation center instead. His years of experience with thoroughbreds proved invaluable, and he seemed happier. The weight of complicity in Wellington's schemes finally lifted from his shoulders. As autumn deepened, Thunder's strength continued to improve. Though he would never race again, his tendon, while healed, would never withstand the stress of competitive racing. He thrived in his new role as the center's ambassador. Schoolchildren visited to learn his story, and Thunder seemed to enjoy the attention, particularly from the younger visitors who brought him carrots and apples. One crisp Saturday morning, Mark found Jake in Thunder's stall, brushing the horse's coat until it shone. "I've been thinking," Mark said, leaning against the stall door. "Thunder's strong enough now for light riding. Nothing strenuous, just walking and maybe a gentle trot on soft ground. What do you think?" Jake's face lit up. "Really? He's ready for that?" Mark nodded. "Dr. Patterson gave the okay yesterday. Said it might even be good for him, keep the muscles around the tendon strong." Jake looked at Thunder, who was watching the conversation with pricked ears, as if understanding they were discussing his future. "What do you say, Thunder? Want to try?" The horse nickered softly, pushing his nose against Jake's chest in what had become his characteristic gesture of affection. Later that day, with Mark's supervision, Jake carefully placed a saddle on Thunder's back for the first time. The horse accepted it calmly, standing patiently as Jake tightened the girth and adjusted the stirrups. "Go slow," Mark cautioned as Jake prepared to mount. "Remember, he's not used to carrying a rider anymore." Jake nodded, taking a deep breath before swinging himself gently onto Thunder's back. The horse shifted slightly, adjusting to the weight, but remained calm. "Good boy," Jake murmured, patting Thunder's neck. "Let's just walk, okay?" With the lightest pressure from his legs, Jake asked Thunder to move forward. The horse responded immediately, stepping out with a smooth, even gait that spoke of his racing bloodlines. They circled the paddock once, twice, Jake barely needing to guide Thunder, who seemed to anticipate his every thought. "It's like he knows exactly what I'm thinking," Jake called to Mark, who watched from the fence with a proud smile. "That's what happens when there's trust," Mark replied. "You two have something special." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the farm, Jake and Thunder stood on a small hill overlooking the property. In the distance, the train tracks where their story had begun glinted in the fading light. No longer a place of fear, but a reminder of how quickly life could change, how a moment of courage could alter everything. Jake leaned forward, his arms encircling Thunder's neck in a gentle hug. "You saved me too, you know," he whispered into the horse's ear. "I didn't know how brave I could be until I met you." Thunder turned his head slightly, his soft brown eye meeting Jake's gaze with what seemed like understanding. In that moment, Jake felt a certainty that transcended words, a knowledge that some bonds once formed became unbreakable. Together, boy and horse watched as the last train of the day passed in the distance, its whistle a faint echo on the wind. Not an ending, but a beginning, for both of them.